Welcome to the Narako Deep Dive, the show where we break down the latest research and science around learning, memory, and on some days, anything else that catches our eyes. So let's jump right in. Today's topic. I hope you enjoy. A child gets abused by a total stranger. They remember it, vividly usually, for the rest of their life.
Right.
But a child abused by someone in their own family, a parent, a sibling, is dramatically more likely to just lose it completely. Some memory researchers have found that people are more likely to have periods of complete amnesia about the abuse when the abuser was a parent or caregiver, compared to when the abuse came from someone outside the family.
While this is a tough topic, it illustrates an important point about memory, which we will dive into today.
So closeness doesn't make the memory stick harder. It makes it disappear. Why would your own brain decide that's the one to erase?
This is Narako Deep Dive. I'm Ellen, your AI expert.
And I'm Ray.
By the end of this, you'll know how your brain deletes a memory on purpose.
And where that delete button breaks. Okay, so for basically a century, the working assumption in psychology was that forgetting is just entropy. Passive. A photograph left in a drawer, fading in the sun. Nobody's doing anything. It just happens to you. Except there's a moment in the 90s that cracked that idea wide open, and it's a genuinely messy piece of history. Suddenly you've got adults in therapy recovering these vivid memories of childhood abuse, stuff they say they'd had zero access to for decades. And it splits the field right down the middle. Some say the trauma got buried. Others say suggestive therapy techniques planted it. It got ugly. Fast.
It really did. Careers ended over this one.
Right. And that's the fork in the road. You can't dismiss all of it, because some of it was clearly real. So a researcher named Jennifer Fried asks the harder question. Is there an actual mechanism that lets someone bury something as huge as ongoing abuse?
So here's the thing that came out of her lab. Betrayal trauma theory. The core claim is that when a child depends on someone for actual survival, food, shelter, everything, staying unaware of the abuse can function as protection. They call it betrayal blindness. It's not that the mind is malfunctioning. It's doing its job, just a very dark version of it.
Which brings us back to the number we opened with. Family member as the abuser. 72% reported a long stretch of total forgetting. Stranger as the abuser? 19.
A 53-point gap.
53 points. Sitting across from your abuser every single day should be the loudest reminder there is. It should burn the memory in, not erase it. So why does proximity do the opposite?
That's the part that shouldn't make sense.
Okay, hold on though. Every single day at breakfast, staring at the person who hurt you. Psychology 101 says repetition is how memory gets stronger, right? Flashcards, spaced repetition. All of it runs on see it again, remember it better. So why would the most repeated cue in this kid's whole life produce the least memory?
Because normally, yes, repetition reinforces. Picture a smoke alarm that goes off the second you walk into the kitchen. Most days, that's useful information, so your brain locks right onto it. But now imagine you can't leave that kitchen. Ever. It's where you eat, where you live. At some point, the brain stops reinforcing the alarm. It starts reaching past it instead. That's the kind of thing Freud's betrayal trauma theory points to. She and other researchers have proposed a few possible mechanisms for it. Things like retrieval inhibition, where the mind is motivated to grab something else instead of pulling the trauma to the surface. I should say, this is still a proposed explanation, not a settled one. Some studies looking for this kind of effect in trauma survivors haven't found a clear difference compared to people without trauma histories.
So the memory isn't failing to fire, it's just being outrun.
Outrun, exactly. Every single day, for years. And here's the part that matters. One diversion doesn't do much on its own. But do it at every breakfast, every dinner for a decade, and you're not just distracting yourself anymore. You're training the retrieval pathway itself to go somewhere else by default. The route to that specific memory weakens from disuse, cue by cue. That's a very different animal from ordinary forgetting, from just misplacing your keys.
Right. This isn't the brain being lazy.
Not remotely. The research on betrayal trauma actually frames it in exactly those terms. The more someone depends on the person hurting them for survival, the more that relational pressure shapes what gets retrieved and what stays buried, sometimes for decades. It's forced adaptation, not a glitch.
An adaptation nobody would ever choose. That still somehow worked. Okay, new term, and I promise it's friendlier than it sounds. Cognitive control. It's just your brain's ability to override its own reflex. Slam the brakes on something automatic before it finishes happening.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this idea that comes up in Anderson's own work, the guy who literally co-wrote the research we've been talking about how automatic these reflexes get once a skill is practiced enough. Think about it like catching something that's falling off a shelf before you even register what's happening. Totally automatic. Everybody's done that with a falling glass.
The reflex is doing the thinking for you.
Exactly. Except, midair, he clocks what the plant actually is.
Which is?
A cactus. And somehow, centimeters from a fistful of spikes, he manages to abort the whole motion. Just stops his own hand, in midair. Plant shatters on the floor. Hand's completely fine.
That is an enormous amount of processing to pull off in under a second.
It's the falling glass thing, but halfway down you realize it's actually a knife.
Which, to be fair, is also a very good instinct to have. And it's not just a party trick. There's an actual lab test built around this exact skill, the go, no-go task. You sit at a computer, press a button for every letter that pops up, you build this rhythm. Except one letter, say X, you're told to never press for. So your brain has to form the habit and interrupt it, over and over, on command.
Which sounds a lot like what just happened with the cactus.
Because the researchers who mapped the brain circuitry behind this found it's the same machinery, more or less. The prefrontal pathways that stop your hand from grabbing a cactus overlap with the ones that stop a memory from surfacing. Don't touch that, and don't think about that may genuinely be the same instruction, just aimed at different targets.
Wait, the exact same circuit?
The exact same circuit.
Okay, wait. So if it's literally the same circuit, what does that actually look like on the inside? Like when I catch a cactus versus when I catch a memory before it lands.
So here's the thing. The lateral prefrontal cortex, that's the region right behind your forehead that handles impulse control, it doesn't really care what it's breaking. With the cactus, it fires a signal down to your motor cortex and says, cut power to the arm, right now. With a memory, the model Anderson and Huddleston lay out is that this same region sends a signal inward instead of outward. And this time, the target is your hippocampus.
The memory's search engine.
Right, the part that goes and retrieves things. And here's the piece that makes this click for me. Picture your hippocampus as a slightly overeager librarian. The second a cue shows up, a face, a smell, a single word, that librarian doesn't wait for permission. It's already sprinting into the stacks to pull the entire file, because completing the pattern is just its job. It's built to do that automatically, every single time.
So it's fast, reflexive.
Completely reflexive, which is exactly the problem if the file is something you'd rather not have. So functionally, what the lateral prefrontal cortex does is act like the head of security standing at the archive door. It clocks the danger, and it cuts power to the room before the librarian's hand actually closes around the folder.
Before, not after the fact.
Before. There's a whole synthesis in Nature Review's neuroscience that actually maps this pathway out. Prefrontal regions stepping in and downregulating hippocampal activity in real time, precisely while someone's actively trying not to remember.
Okay, so hippocampus goes dark, memory's blocked. Done?
That's what I'd have guessed too, but it goes one layer further, and this is the part that gets me. The same control also dampens something called neocortical reinstatement, which is just the replay. The sensory and emotional detail, the smell of the room, the sound of the voice, that would normally flood back along with the memory. Researchers looking at repeated suppression trials found that gets turned down too, at the same time, not afterward.
So it's not just blocking the file, it's dimming the whole room around it.
Exactly. And that's the reframe that actually matters here. This isn't the librarian sliding the folder into a locked drawer where it's sitting there fully intact, waiting for later. This is an active intervention inside the retrieval machinery itself, while the machinery is running. The circuit that finds memories and the circuit that lets you re-experience them are both being reached into and turned down, on purpose, in the moment.
Huh. That's a very different picture than hiding something behind a curtain.
Considerably, nothing's hidden. Something is happening.
Hang on, wait. Methodologically, though, how do you even test this? How do you prove someone isn't thinking about something? That's not exactly a thing you can watch happen.
That's the exact problem they had to solve. So they built something called the think-no-think paradigm. And it's basically 3 phases, stacked like you're assembling a machine, one piece locking into the next.
3 phases. Walk me through it.
Phase 1's just training. You give people totally unrelated word pairs, ordeal and roach, steam and train, nothing connected at all.
Why fake pairs, though? Why not just use real memories?
Because with a manufactured pair, you know exactly what's supposed to surface and exactly when it started. You can't get that precision with somebody's actual trauma.
Right. Clean baseline.
Exactly. And you drill it until it's automatic. See, ordeal, your brain just spits out roach without even trying.
So you're installing a reflex.
That's actually not a bad way to put it.
Don't sound so shocked. Okay, phase 2.
Phase 2, the same cues come back, but now with rules. Some pairs you're told, think of the paired word. Those are respond trials, completely normal remembering, no tricks yet.
And the others?
The others are suppress trials. You see ordeal, and you have to actively...
Keep roach from surfacing at all.
Exactly that. And a third set just sits there, never mentioned again. Your baseline, whatever you forget naturally with 0 effort spent either way.
Respond, suppress, ignore. 3 lanes.
3 lanes.
And phase 3?
Phase 3 is the trap, a surprise final exam. Every cue comes back and they just ask, what was the paired word?
Wait. Surprise? They don't know it's coming?
Nobody knows in advance. That's the whole point. You can't perform for a test you don't know exists.
Sneaky.
Very.
Okay, that's actually clever.
And there's real weight behind it. There's a peer-reviewed model built on exactly this design, and it shows deliberate suppression causally drags down later recall. Not just distraction in the moment, they manipulate it directly, on purpose, and watch the memory come out worse.
So it's not people who happen to forget things also happen to suppress things.
No, same person, same memory, deliberately suppressed versus deliberately left alone. And the suppressed one loses, every time.
All right, machine's built. Now I want to know what it actually caught.
So here's the actual scale of this thing, because it matters. This isn't one lab, one afternoon. Researchers have run this same basic setup, the think-no-think paradigm, in more than 100 separate studies at this point, with the effect turning up again and again, even though the size of it varies from study to study.
Okay, that's not a pilot study. That's a small country.
Close to it. So the words people were told to actively think about, the respond trials, those tended to be recalled noticeably better than the ones people were told to suppress. I don't have an exact percentage, but the pattern is that suppression leads to worse recall later on.
Right, makes sense. You rehearsed it.
And the ones they were told to actively block? Recall drops to about 15%.
Okay, so trying not to think about it works. Fine, expected.
That part, sure. But here's the number that actually breaks the passive decay story.
Go on.
There was a third group of words in this whole design. Pairs people were just never asked to do anything with. Never told to remember, never told to block, just left alone, sitting there the whole session. That's your true baseline, the closest thing to natural, do-nothing forgetting. And the suppressed words? Recalled about 8% worse than those.
Wait, worse than the ones nobody touched at all?
Worse than the ones nobody touched at all. And there's real published work behind this exact pattern, suppression-induced forgetting, they call it, showing suppressed items consistently underperform baseline, and the gap gets bigger the more times you practice suppressing. So actively fighting a memory doesn't just fail to help, it leaves you worse off than if you'd never engaged with it in the first place.
So ignoring something and fighting something are not the same move at all. Okay, hold on though. I have to push back here. If I'm sitting in a lab and some scientist in a white coat very seriously tells me, do not think about the word roach, and then 20 minutes later asks me what the word was, I'm probably just going to say I forgot, because that's clearly the answer they're hoping for. How do we know these people aren't just being polite test subjects?
That's exactly the hole the researchers had to plug first, or none of this means anything.
Right. So how'd they plug it?
First control. Researchers have tested the same worry in related memory studies, offering people real cash rewards for correct or accurate answers on the final test. If someone's just playing along to be a nice subject, that motivation should evaporate the moment there's money on the table. But in similar work looking at persistent effects like this, adding monetary bonuses didn't change the outcome. The money bought nothing.
Huh. Okay, that's a lot harder to fake your way around.
It gets better, actually. In a related version of this kind of study, researchers looked at what happens when people know ahead of time that the suppressed material will be tested. So there's every incentive to hang on to it. Even then, expecting that final test did nothing to undo the effect of trying to push the words out of mind. If this were just people telling the scientists what they wanted to hear, that should have unlocked the memory instantly. It didn't budge. And this lines up with peer-reviewed research on exactly this question. Deliberately trying to stop remembering something can genuinely weaken it, not just make you claim you forgot.
So it's not amnesia theater.
No, it's a real impairment in the retrieval machinery itself. Something in there actually got harder to reach, regardless of what anyone had to gain by lying about it.
Okay, I'm convinced. That's unsettlingly real. Okay, so pull up on this for a second, because I think there are two totally different things that could be happening when someone suppresses a word. One, you see the cue, and you deliberately think about something else. Picture a puppy, whatever. The other, you don't substitute anything. You just hold the door shut on the thought itself. Same instructions on paper. Probably very different biology underneath.
And that's exactly the split the researchers cared about. They call it thought substitution versus direct suppression.
Right, so let's actually build this out. Thought substitution is like throwing a rug over a wine stain on the carpet. Looks clean. Problem solved, as far as anyone glancing at the floor is concerned.
And direct suppression is the one where you get down there with the bleach and actually go after the fibers.
Exactly. You're trying to degrade the stain itself, not just hide it under something.
That's the right instinct. One conceals a memory that's still fully there. The other actually damages the trace. And the clever part is how they proved which one was which. Because from the outside, both just look like, I can't remember. So they use something called a cue independence test. Instead of showing you the original cue, ordeal, they sneak in the back door with a totally unrelated one. Name an insect that starts with R. No mention of ordeal at all. If the memory is just hidden, that new door should walk right past the rug and find roach waiting there, perfectly intact.
And that's exactly what happened with substitution?
Exactly. The puppy trick showed a solid forgetting effect, around 13%, but only with the original cue. Ask through the back door and it evaporates completely. People remember roach instantly. The rug lifts, the stain's still there. Direct suppression is the opposite story, about a 9% effect, and it survives the backdoor cue. The memory stays harder to reach no matter which door you knock on. There's a well-cited paper on exactly this that found suppression doesn't just block a memory from awareness in the moment. It genuinely weakens the trace, so it has less pull on you even later, indirectly, when you're not even trying to retrieve it on purpose.
So distraction never actually touches the file. Suppression rewrites it. That's a much weirder power than I thought we had. Okay, so correct me if I'm oversimplifying, but the brain just deletes the file, right? That's the takeaway.
Well, actually, it's a little more interesting than that. Some researchers would say what we just described, the prefrontal cortex hitting the brakes on the hippocampus, hasn't been proven to be genuine inhibition at all. There's a real, live argument in the field about whether inhibition is even the right word for what's happening under the hood.
Wait, hold on. We just spent 10 minutes building this head of security metaphor. Are you telling me the security guard might not actually exist?
Not that he doesn't exist. More that we can't say for certain he's the one doing the work. So here's the thing. There's a well-known paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that ran the exact same cue independence test we just walked through, the backdoor question, remember? And found you can produce that same forgetting survives a new door result purely from interference. Meaning, the person crowds out the unwanted memory with a competing thought, and no direct shutdown of the original trace is required at all. And this is the part that gets me. A separate appraisal in Psychonomic Bulletin and Review went back through the classic behavioral evidence people use to argue for inhibition and found that none of those signatures are uniquely diagnostic. So the data we've been so impressed by fits inhibition. It also fits interference. It's a fingerprint at the scene that doesn't actually point to one suspect.
Okay, that is deeply unsatisfying.
Isn't it, though? But here's the honest version, and I actually think it's the better one. Nobody in this debate doubts that the forgetting itself is real. The memory genuinely gets harder to reach. That part holds up everywhere you look. What's still open is which gears are turning underneath it. Pure inhibition, pure interference, some shifting blend of both depending on the person and the memory. The effect is solid ground. The mechanism is still under construction.
So we know what happens. We just don't fully know how yet.
Exactly that. And I'd rather hand you an honest, we're still working it out, than a tidy story that quietly overclaims.
Huh. Okay. I respect that more than a clean answer, weirdly. Okay. Hold that under construction feeling for a second, because there's a data run coming that's just genuinely fun. It's about dose.
Dose. Yes, this is the part that feels like compounding interest.
Compounding interest. Meaning the more you suppress something, the more it costs the memory?
Exactly. They ran it at 0 suppression attempts, 1, 8, 16, and the forgetting effect climbs every single step up. There's a paper in Current Directions in Psychological Science that tracks this directly. The effect grows with practice, like you're actually training a skill, not just getting lucky once.
So it's not one dramatic poof, gone. It's reps.
Reps. The trace erodes a little more with every attempt.
That's oddly athletic for a mental process.
And it's not confined to word pairs either. They replicated it with real emotional images, car crash photos, injury photos.
Wait, hold on. They showed people car wreck photos and told them to suppress that?
Same dose-response curve held up.
Okay, but the part I genuinely can't get over is the warning thing you mentioned earlier. Explain that.
Yes, this is the one that gets me every time. Give the brain a heads up, some kind of warning cue flashed on screen right before a suppression trial, and the forgetting effect gets noticeably stronger than when there's no warning at all. Researchers have found this anticipatory phase measurably boosts forgetting of the to-be-suppressed memory compared to when people are cued with no advance warning. The idea is that that little window is enough time for the control region we talked about to get itself loaded before the memory even arrives. The brakes stop reacting to the threat. They start anticipating it.
Quadruples. From 1 second and a red cross.
From a red cross.
So the security guard's hand is already on the switch before the threat even walks through the door.
Already on it. Just waiting.
Okay, so if we've all supposedly got this same braking system, does everyone get the same amount of brake?
Not even close, no. And this is honestly the part I find most humbling, because this ability isn't some setting you're born with, fully installed. It has to develop. Research on kids shows that around 8 or 9 years old, they largely fail to show this kind of memory suppression at all. Not because they're not trying, but because the hardware for it, the lateral prefrontal cortex, the region running the braking, simply hasn't matured enough yet. Studies find that capacity for it improves noticeably between ages 8 and 12, with reliable suppression really showing up by around 10 to 12, roughly tracking how that brain region develops. And then, decades later, on the other end of life, we often see a related pattern, older adults showing declines in executive control over memory retrieval, suggesting those same prefrontal networks that once braked reliably start to lose some of that grip.
Huh. So it's less a switch and more something that has to finish growing in.
Right, and that same wiring is exactly why ADHD is such a striking case study here. Researchers have put adults with ADHD through inhibition tasks like this, and it's a mixed picture. On tasks that require effortful, deliberate stopping, like reflexively halting a motor response, they show a real, measurable deficit. But on a specific kind of automatic suppression task, negative priming, some studies have found essentially no impairment at all compared to controls, which suggests the ADHD brain doesn't struggle uniformly with control as a single thing. It's specific systems that break down, not everything at once.
Wait, 0? As in, suppressing does literally nothing for them?
None. Genuinely none. And it lines up perfectly with what we already know about ADHD and physical impulse control. The tapping, the blurting out, the interrupting mid-sentence. It's the same braking hardware, just running underpowered across the board. If it can't stop a hand or a mouth in the moment, there's no reason it should be able to stop a memory either.
Okay, that's a genuinely elegant connection.
And depression tells almost the mirror image story. People with depression consistently struggle to suppress unwanted memories too. But here's the part that really gets me. In some studies, when depressed patients tried to actively push a negative word out of mind, they ended up remembering it better afterward than if they'd never engaged with it at all. The suppression doesn't just fail, it backfires. There's a major review in Nature Reviews Neuroscience that connects this directly to real clinical intrusive memory disorders, suggesting that depression and PTSD may partly come down to this exact braking mechanism misfiring rather than simply being absent.
That's brutal. The one tool you'd need most just stops working.
Yes, and that's the rumination loop right there. The brakes fail, the thought keeps circling back, and it just won't let go.
Okay, so we just did the broken brakes version of this story. I want to show you the other end of it. Because it turns out, if you force this system to work overtime, every single day, for years, it doesn't wear out. It gets stronger.
Yeah, this is the finding that always surprises people.
Right. So remember those kids from betrayal trauma, growing up with a parent who was also the danger. Researchers went back and tested adults with heavy lifetime trauma exposure, accidents, violence, abuse, on the same suppression task everyone else took. And the findings weren't all one direction. Some studies found people with more trauma history were actually better at suppressing unwanted memories, while other work found trauma-exposed adults had more trouble suppressing negative material than people without that history.
And they didn't just perform normally.
They didn't. They showed larger negative control effects than the average person, better at it. Like the forgetting muscle got built by forced daily reps nobody signed up for.
Which is a hard thing to sit with, honestly.
It is. And there's real research that takes that idea somewhere I wasn't prepared for. Researchers studying dissociative amnesia have documented cases where someone's entire personal history seems to vanish, with no brain damage to explain it.
Wait, gone how? Head injury? Stroke? Something structural?
That's the thing. Nothing. No brain damage. Normal IQ. His executive function, planning, focus, all of it, completely intact. He can hold a conversation, do math, navigate the world fine. He just doesn't have a past anymore. Psychogenic amnesia, they call it, meaning the cause looks psychological, not phycology.
That's genuinely eerie.
So they sit him down for the same think, no think test we've been talking about all episode. And where a normal person suppresses a word maybe 8-9% worse than baseline, PP hits 40 to 60%, off the chart entirely. Whatever happened to him didn't just trip the breaker for one memory. It looks like it welded the switch permanently to off.
So here's the part that ties this whole hour together for me. There's a model in the research, motivated forgetting, it's called. And the core claim is basically this. What you're motivated to attend to and retrieve is just as much a determinant of what survives in memory as decay or interference ever were. PP is that idea taken to its absolute limit. His brain didn't lose the ability to remember. Something in him became so motivated to not retrieve his own history that the machinery locked there. Which is the whole point, isn't it? We've spent this entire episode watching proof that the brain isn't a passive tape recorder quietly fading in a drawer somewhere. It's editing. Constantly, actively, on purpose, deciding moment to moment what gets to stay.
Curating its own past. Wow. Curating its own past is going to live in my head for a while. Though it makes me wonder something. This whole hour we've been talking about a brain that's choosing to forget. Effort, motivation, someone hitting a switch. What if you're not choosing anything?
That's exactly the right question. And so here's the thing. Even without any conscious suppression effort at all, even in a mouse that's never heard of a think-no-think task, forgetting is still happening, constantly, at the molecular level. And it turns out there's dedicated biological machinery running it. Not decay, not neglect, machinery.
Machinery. Okay, I'm listening.
Start with neurogenesis, just the birth of new neurons, something we assumed stopped completely once you hit adulthood. It doesn't, not in the hippocampus. There's a study in Science that tested this in mice. Right after learning, they boost neurogenesis, and those new neurons wire into the existing network and actively destabilize the memory that's already there.
Wait, so growing more brain makes you forget more?
In this exact context, yes. And it runs backwards, too. Turn neurogenesis down in an infant, and memories that would normally vanish start sticking around. One real candidate explanation for why none of us remember being two. An infant hippocampus is flooded with new cells, constantly under construction.
Great. So I don't remember my second birthday because my brain was mid-renovation.
Essentially, yes. And it gets more specific. There's a neuron paper on dopamine neurons whose one job seems to be forgetting. When they fire, they trigger a cascade inside the exact cells holding a memory. That's the engram, the physical cluster of neurons where one specific memory lives, running through a protein called RAC1 that restructures the connections and wears the trace down. Silence those cells, and forgetting slows down measurably.
So there's a forget button, and it has its own dedicated cells.
Pretty much. Zoom in one more level to the synapse, where one neuron hands a signal to the next, and you find AMPA receptors, specifically ones with a piece called GluA2. Holding on to more of these is literally what makes a connection stronger. That strengthening is called LTP, long-term potentiation, the leading theory for how a memory gets written in the first place. Forgetting, down here, is those same receptors getting physically dragged back inside the cell, uninstalled. And evidence points to this running hardest during sleep.
So learning installs the furniture, and forgetting just quietly unbolts it.
I would not have phrased it that way, but yes. And that's the reframe I want to leave here. Forgetting was never just insufficient rehearsal. It's an active process running in parallel with memory formation the entire time, keeping the whole system from saturating.
Not a bug. Maintenance.
Constant maintenance, running whether you notice it or not.
Okay, hold on. If forgetting has an actual molecular pathway, can't we just skip all this suppression effort and take a pill? Wipe it clean?
That's the question everyone lands on the second they hear forgetting has a mechanism. And there is a whole line of research chasing that hope. It's built around something called reconsolidation. Basically, the moment you retrieve an old memory, it doesn't just sit there. It briefly goes unstable again, chemically rewritable, before it locks back down into storage.
Rewritable. Okay, now I'm listening.
So here's the actual finding. Give someone propranolol. It's a heart medication. It blocks adrenaline receptors. Right after they retrieve a fear memory, during that unstable window, and something real happens. There's a study on disrupting reconsolidation showing the drug selectively strips out the emotional, motivational charge of the memory. But the factual content, the prediction, this cue means danger, survives completely intact.
Wait, so the memory's still there? It just doesn't scare you anymore?
Essentially, yes. And I'll concede, on its own, that could just mean the drug made everyone generally calmer, right? That alone wouldn't prove much. But that's not what happened. The predictive information stayed sharp. People still knew what the cue meant. They just stopped having the visceral, gut-level reaction to it. The fear got peeled off the fact.
Huh. So it's not deleting the file. It's ripping the emotional sticky note off of it.
That's exactly it. And it lines up with everything else today. Even patient PP, the most extreme suppressor on record, topped out around 40 to 60%. Not 100. Nobody hits 100. As far as the current science can tell, true total erasure, content gone, zero trace, nothing left to find, doesn't really happen in a human brain.
Okay. So there's no delete button after all.
No delete button, just a very, very good editor.
Actually, can we go all the way back to the top of the episode for a second? That statistic we opened with. 72% of people abused by a family member, going through long stretches of just forgetting it happened, versus 19% when it's a stranger. I took that as basically proof. Case closed. The brain protects the attachment. I don't think I can just leave it sitting there without saying something.
Good. You shouldn't.
Right, because there's a pretty blunt critique of that whole read on the data, and it's almost annoyingly simple. A kid abused by a parent doesn't need some special amnesia mechanism to end up looking like they forgot. They could just never tell anyone, never think about it out loud, never bring it up, for years, sometimes decades. And a memory nobody ever revisits fades the ordinary, boring way. No dramatic braking system required. Keeping the relationship intact doesn't require erasing the event. It just requires staying quiet about it.
Which is exactly the argument a critical appraisal of betrayal trauma theory makes. It goes back through the evidence and points out it doesn't unequivocally show genuine amnesia at all. A child can preserve the attachment just fine by never disclosing. That alone accounts for the pattern. No special mechanism required.
Huh. So the same 72% could just be quiet kids, not edited brains.
Possibly, yes, and it gets messier once therapy enters the picture. There's a body of research on recovered memories showing certain interview and therapy techniques can genuinely plant vivid, detailed memories of things that never actually happened. So when someone recovers a childhood memory decades later, we're left with real uncertainty, a suppressed trace resurfacing, or a story assembled afterward. The honest answer is, often, we can't tell the difference.
Okay. So the fact we open the episode with isn't wrong, exactly. It's just not proof of the thing I wanted it to prove.
Right. It's consistent with motivated forgetting. It's also consistent with plain, ordinary silence. Science doesn't get to pick the more dramatic answer just because it makes the better story.
That might genuinely be the tagline for this whole episode.
But here's the part that actually makes me hopeful instead of just fascinated. If this braking system gets stronger under trauma and weaker in ADHD or depression, that's not two separate stories. That's one dial, one circuit that moves in both directions, depending on what you ask it to do.
Wait, so it's trainable either way, up or down?
Exactly, which is a completely different claim than some people just have good brains. It means the prefrontal hippocampal connection, the brakes talking to the librarian basically, responds to practice. Deliberately engaging it over and over changes what it can do.
Okay, so theoretically, you could train someone's forgetting muscle back up if it's broken.
That's the real clinical hope, yeah, for PTSD, for depression, for people stuck in intrusive memory loops. Understand the circuit well enough, and you're not just managing symptoms anymore. You're potentially rebuilding the actual mechanism that failed.
Huh. That's a genuinely different kind of therapy.
Right, closer to targeted cognitive training than a conversation. Practice the stopping, specifically, the way you'd rehab a weak muscle rather than just talk around it.
Okay, hold on though. How far off is that realistically? Are we talking labs or actual treatment?
Honestly, early. Promising, replicated in principle, but early. Nobody's handing out a prescription for suppress harder yet.
Shame. I was going to ask for a subscription.
Give it a few years. Science, also occasionally very funny.
Fair. But seriously, I like that this ends on the brain can be retrained, not some people are just doomed.
That's the whole shift, really. Motivated forgetting isn't a flaw to fix. It's a skill with a floor and a ceiling, and apparently quite a lot of room to grow.
All right, let's zoom out for a second, because we've covered a lot of ground here. First big thing worth holding on to. Forgetting isn't your brain being lazy or breaking down. It has dedicated machinery for it. Prefrontal circuits acting like brakes. Dopamine cells built specifically to erode a trace. Actual receptor proteins getting physically pulled out of your synapses. Someone, biologically speaking, is pulling the plug on purpose. That's not decay. That's demolition.
Which is still the wildest reframe for me. Forgetting has an address.
Second thing, and honestly, I think this is the hopeful one. None of this ability is fixed at birth or locked in for life. Kids under 9 basically can't do it yet. People with ADHD or depression often can't do it well at all. But people who've lived through real trauma get measurably better at it, out of sheer necessity. Same circuitry, wildly different training history. That's genuinely good news if yours could use the work.
A skill, not a trait.
Exactly. And third, erasing oversells what's actually happening in there. Even the most extreme case we talked about, someone whose whole autobiography went dark, never hit true zero. Mostly what the brain does is weaken a memory, fragment it apart, or peel the emotional charge off the plain facts underneath. It's editing. Honest science still doesn't know every step of how that works, and that uncertainty is kind of the point.
Which honestly should be reassuring, not disappointing. Nobody's asking for a delete key.
Right? And here's what actually gets me, thinking about this through Narako's lens. If forgetting runs on the same trainable circuitry as remembering, same prefrontal wiring, same capacity to change with practice, then everything that strengthens a memory is, in a real sense, exercising that exact same
Retrieval practice, spacing, novelty, sleep-aware scheduling, the stuff you'd actually want to build a whole learning app around.
Yes, exactly that. It's not just good study habits anymore. It's you deliberately training the exact same machinery we just spent an entire episode taking apart, on purpose, for once, instead of by accident.
You're not just building a better memory, you're building a better editor.
Okay, I'm stealing that line. That's the episode, everybody. Go build a better editor. And maybe start with tonight's sleep. Well, that wraps up our episode. If you're still listening, I wanted to thank you for sticking with us through this journey. And we hope you learned something new, as that is our goal with the Narako Project. To teach people new things and help them remember them. We hope to see you next week again, where we will continue to tackle and dive into even more interesting topics. Have a nice rest of your day, and thank you.